Hey, YouTube theologians. Pastor Wolfmueller here, pastor of St. Paul and Jesus Deaf Lutheran Churches in Austin, Texas, with Pastor Andrew Packer of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Collinsville, Illinois. Pastor Packer, I heard a rumor about you that for the third year in a row, you've been snuffed in your application to be a shepherd in the live nativity, and you'll be an angel again this year.
Is that true? I don't remember. It could be.
Or is
There's
it
too much
4
going on
years
this
in a row
month.
now? You're like,
It could
look,
be like 5.
I grew the shepherd beard. You applied. You went to the photo studio and had some glamour shots of you dressed as a shepherd. And still, they're like, you're out, buddy. We got better shepherds.
Do you remember glamour shots? Because it's kind of amazing what they did to the lady's hair in those glamour shots back in the day.
I do.
If you haven't seen those, people listening, you should check those out. They're something else.
We are answering your theology questions, which you can send at wolfmueller.co/contact and send the questions there. It seems like we're not catching up, really. It seems like the inflow, even though we're doing 7 questions a week, the in and out. Anyway, that's great. We'll see what we do today. But so before we get started, though, I have 3 advertisements, super quick. Number 1, our mutual friend Pastor Flammy is doing a trip to Germany next August, which is awesome. That's really great. So we'll put the info in the description. If you're interested in going to discover the Luther lands, it's a super cool tour. He's working with Globus too, which we've worked with, and they just do an excellent job. That'll be a lot of fun. Number 2, I wrote this little book on the prodigal son, finally free, which is available for pre-order now. It'll be out on January 15th through CPH. It's a little short book. It's like 70 pages. So that's my kind of length of book, but it's about the 3 slaveries and 3 freedoms of the prodigal son. If you like this podcast, you'll probably like the book. Third, most importantly, we published this text, Rome Examined, which is a simplified edition of Martin Chemnitz's Examination of the Council of Trent, Part 1, which studies scripture, tradition, freedom of the will, faith, forgiveness of sins, and justification. And you can download it for free, 100% free. You don't have to give your email or anything. Just go wolfmueller.co. There, it's right there. You can download the PDF. You can find each of the articles its own page. You can buy it on Lulu if you want, but you could it's there. And a thank you especially to the people who support like this podcast and subscribe to the Substack. That helps be able to do this stuff for free. So I think that's a huge resource for the whole church. I'm very happy to be a part of that project. So that's available. Okay, enough of this. Pastor Packer, let's do some questions.
All right, I'm combining like 3 questions about worship music into one question. So I'm just kind of winging it as far as how to word it. I'm going to try to summarize your thoughts. So we had one question that was, their church does a contemporary service, I think it's like once a month or something. And that's the only thing they offer that weekend. And so she's frustrated and doesn't really sing or participate and wants to know how she should deal with having a church that does this contemporary service once in a while, but doesn't offer anything else. Another question related to that was, why are we offering contemporary services at all in Lutheran churches? And then the opposite question of that was, it was kind of pointed at you. What do you have against contemporary worship? Isn't it? And their question was, isn't it? At some point, all the hymns were contemporary. Yes. At some point, all the hymns were new. And so their question is, if you don't like contemporary worship, then we should just go back to just like Gregorian chant. Was kind of the implication at the end of that. So I'm asking like 3 things, but they're all very related. So I thought I'd just put them together for you to kind of take them at once. And because the answer is going to be similar for all of them, I have a feeling. So
no, that's right. So, thank you for thinking about this. How we worship it is almost impossible to overstate how important the way we worship is. That's a bad sentence, but that's the point. So, remember how like Psalm 115 talks about the people who make the idols. It says they have eyes they don't see, they have lips they don't speak, they have ears they don't hear. They have feet, but they don't go anywhere. That's the idols. Those who make them become like them, and so do all who worship them. So that worship is that way that our hearts are shaped. And if we're worshiping a false god, it's being shaped to reflect the false god. And if we're worshiping the true God, if our heart's fear, love, and trust is directed to God above all else, then it's shaping our hearts in that way. So that the Lord, through his institution of worship, is giving shape to our heart. So it's vitally important to think about it. Now, the part of the problem is with the name contemporary, right? Because like you and I are contemporaries, but I'm a lot older than you. Is that true?
I don't think so.
How old are you? I'm 48. How old are you?
I am 46.
Yeah.
So I
I'm
mean,
quite a bit older.
whole 2 years, yeah.
So anyway, it's a contemporary is a misnomer because whoever wrote that third question is right. Every hymn at some point was contemporary. It's like written right now. But what is meant by that phrase contemporary worship is it actually has nothing to do with the chronology. There's probably phases of contemporary worship. There's different kind of eras of it that it went through, but there was a move in, I don't know, probably back in the 60s, coming out of the 50s, 60s, there was always these kind of Christian folk songs. That's always existed, the kind of camp songs. And there was a move to bring that into the worship service of the church, and the kind of stated thing at the beginning was accessibility. So that these songs were more familiar, they were easier to sing, they were simpler, at least theologically simpler, maybe musically different, but whatever. So you had the question of accessibility. And that already is a problem. In other words, I do not think that we need to be thinking about accessibility, but we need to be thinking about accessibility without compromise. So it should be possible for people to come into the worshiping church and be able to make it in there somehow, but it shouldn't be that easy because it is a different world. It's a different thing that's happening. But we passed in the mid-90s the question of accessibility. And the question I think of, and this had to do with the Maranatha movement, with the rise of the big box churches, with the rise of contemporary Christian music as an industry. I mean, it's a huge industry. And a couple of other things, I think spiritual things and also theological things. The goal of contemporary music changed from accessibility in the sense that people unfamiliar with the church and the liturgy could come into church, to the accessibility of God himself. And so the goal of contemporary music became mystical. The goal became to create an experience where I feel or touch or realize or somehow recognize the immediate presence of God. And the verse that took over at this time was the psalm that says that God inhabits the praises of his people. And so the contemporary Christian worship movement, again, starting from the 90s and extending today, although there's an alt-Christian contemporary worship that I want to talk about now. But the goal starting back with like Maranatha music and the Jesus movement and all of this was that I know that God is present by the worship experience, and it became a sacrament. The contemporary worship became a sacrament, but there was no mediation there. It was an immediate thing, and it became mystical. So back on the old Table Talk radio days, we had the Praise Song Cruncher, which was simply an evaluation of the mystical content of the songs, and you could notice its mysticism by the use of images rather than assertions. There's all these sentence fragments, by the immediate sense of God's presence, by the emphasis on the subjective feeling of God being there and so forth, and by the very individualistic and non-theological character of the songs. That continues today, especially through Hillsong and all of the other popular big church music industry stuff. Now, there's kind of an indie contemporary Christian music, which is growing up in all these kind of confessional reform circles. All the bearded Calvinists are like taking the old hymns and setting them to guitar music. That's cool. They're trying to be anti-mystical, although it's difficult to do it. But I'm more sympathetic to that move. There's the Church Music Writers Institute out of Irvine, it's trying to capture all that energy from the bearded Calvinists with guitars stuff and bring it into the Lutheran Church. Okay, I don't think it's necessary. I'm not sure we need to be spending that much energy on the project, but fine. But the big danger of contemporary worship is not that it's contemporary. We would never say the problem with this song is that it's not old enough, as if there's some sort of age limit on the songs that we sing. The problem is, well, what is it? And maybe to simplify the whole thing, the divine service, the liturgy, brings down to earth, down to us, all 5 of the activities that we see happening in the heavenly throne room. The conversation of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the judgment of God where sins are forgiven, the receiving of prayers and petitions, the worship of God, and then the sending forth of the preachers, the servants of God, so that the word goes forth. The liturgy is the place that is sent, so that in the divine service, the word is spoken, the absolution is given, the prayers ascend, God is praised. And what contemporary worship has done is isolated that activity of praise and exalted it above all the others. So you can even hear it in the language. People say, well, we have a praise service. Well, okay, that's fine, but that's not the only thing that happens in the heavenly throne room is praise. There needs to be more than that. And so the divine service, the liturgy, brings all of that to bear. So that's the big point, I think. And if we have that understanding that the liturgy is the reflection of heaven, just like in the Old Testament, God said to Moses, make a reflection of what you see. If we say, okay, here's what we see in heaven, we want to have a reflection of it in the service, and it's in the service so that it can then be double reflected into my own heart. If we understand that, then we end up having a service centered around the word and the sacrament that's joyfully reverent in form, and it's very liturgy-y. The problem with contemporary worship, and this goes to the first 2 questions, is that when we start asking the question, well, what do people like, or what are people familiar with, or what do people want? Then we've flipped the engine of liturgical discernment. Rather than saying, how can we receive the gifts that God gives, we've started asking, how can we make ourselves appealing to members or people outside? And this is why, okay, sorry, I keep, like 5 times I've wanted to, you're sitting there falling asleep. So sorry. But I was talking to a guy. This is very interesting. So here, I'll tell you a story and I'll get your reflection on this. It's a pastor of another church. They have different services. You know, they've got their liturgical service, or their, what they call, they don't call it liturgical. They call it traditional. You got their traditional, then they got their blended, and then they got their contemporary. And I made this assertion. I said, I could give you my bulletin and my sermon and my everything, and your traditional service, you could do there the exact same thing that we're doing at St. Paul in Austin. Same liturgy, same words, same service, same setting, same sermon, same everything, and you would be doing a different thing. Because you're offering that up as one option for the Lord's people to decide, do I like that, or do I like that, or do I like that? And when you are offering up an option, it's something totally different. The parallel is like, if I go to my mom's house and she makes a steak and shake smash burger for dinner, or I go to Steak and Shake and I get the smash burger, it's the same exact burger, but it's totally different because Mom didn't ask me what I wanted. She made burgers for everybody. And so whenever you add in this, what is your preference, you're completely changing the thing that's happening. Okay, so that's a lot. I'll get your thoughts on this.
Well, I actually have more questions to throw your way, because I think it might be helpful for people thinking through this. Before we go any further with that, it does seem like just on that issue of accessibility, because that comes up a lot in this, like our worship style isn't accessible to the guy off the street who knows nothing about Jesus. And so I do think there is, among some fellow Lutheran pastors, there's at least a good desire. Like they want people to come in who don't know Jesus, and they believe that by making it more accessible, in their minds it's more accessible, that this style is more accessible, therefore you're going to get the unbeliever off the street who doesn't know anything about Jesus is more likely to come to that service than a so-called traditional service. Now, I'm not 100% convinced that's the case, but that's their concern. What would you tell a pastor who's wrestling with that? Like, hey, I get all that you're saying, Pastor Wolfmueller, but man, I'm just worried about that guy who's never been to church. And if they come into a traditional service, they're not gonna want anything to do with that, and they'll leave and never come back.
I think the chief. So let me just not argue with the premise. I think there's places to argue with the premise, but let me just assume the premise and to say that assume all the premises there. And number one, that being more accessible is more likely for people to be able to come, for example, or that the people who are outside the church looking for the church are looking for something that they understand rather than looking for something that's transcendent. So let me just assume the whole thing. The chief way to make the service accessible is by warm, friendly people sitting next to you. You could go into a service that's in a completely different language, that's played with instruments you've never heard before or whatever. And if there are kind, generous, warm, affectionate people, that is the thing. You could go into a service that's just like everything else that you're used to, and if the people around you are cold and indifferent, then there's nothing you don't want to go back. So I think that the accessibility question is chiefly a question of hospitality, and that we need to be praying for people who have the gift of hospitality. We need to be encouraging the gift of hospitality and warmth, and for every Christian to recognize this. And it's hard for us to remember if we've been Christian for a long time or if we've been in our church for a long time, is that going to a new church is traumatic. And I try to explain this to our ushers and et cetera, that whenever someone's visiting, it's because something huge has happened in their lives. Maybe they just moved from Austin to Collinsville, and then now they're used to coming to St. Paul, and now they're going to go to Good Shepherd. But even still, their whole life is uprooted. Their neighbors and friends are gone. That's already traumatic. The least traumatic is when someone comes to Austin to go to the Formula One race, and they come and they're like, oh, I love how Pastor Packer answers the questions. I'm going to go to church over there at St. Paul or whatever. That's like the least traumatic. But if someone's coming from a different church, well, why are they leaving their church? If someone's coming from a different denomination, what happened that they started to question the doctrine of their church? If someone hasn't been to church and they're starting to come to church, whatever it is, there was weeks and weeks of thinking about it, of wondering if they should, of maybe even driving to the parking lot and not coming in, of looking all this stuff of wondering why things seem different and their whole world seems upside down. All of that's happened before they've come to church. And so to recognize that when someone comes into church, they're bringing all those questions and wondering and everything with them, and to have a warmth there to welcome them and to say, this is where you should be. We're so happy. What's your name? This is my name. Tell me your story. That is the thing that matters. And you could have the highest of liturgy or the rockiest of praise bands. That's I think the key question. So putting that question of hospitality onto the liturgy is the wrong place to put it. That would be my advice. Now, do we recognize that the liturgy is a foreign language, that it's strange? We should recognize that, and we should provide ways for people to start to get access to that. So, for example, we publish a visitor bulletin, which has all the hymns and all the words and all the everything, so they don't need to worry about navigating the hymnal, because who knows what page you're on and everything. Great. Stuff like that, this is great. But for people to know that, hey, the thing that's happening here in this place is different than the thing that happens in my living room or in my workplace or in my everywhere else, that's important. That's an important part of our confession as Christians. That the liturgy is it's reminding us that we're not of this world, that we're strangers here.
Going back to the first question, so what do you do if you are in an area where your church has once a month or every other week or something, where you're going between traditional and contemporary, and you don't like the contemporary, but you're trying to go because it's your church? What advice do you give to her or others like her who are struggling with that kind of thing? What should she do? How should she handle that? She said she's often not singing. She feels guilty about it, but she struggles with what the songs are saying.
Yeah. You never, ever should participate in anything that troubles your conscience. And anyone who would ask you to do that would be is kind of a spiritual tyranny. So you never confess anything you don't believe. Never pray something that you don't fully believe in. And if there's a song that you don't, even if you're not sure about, even if it's a hymn, then silence. That's so that's the first thing. It would be good to talk to your pastor about this and to let him know your own spiritual concerns. Oftentimes, though, this conversation, well, most of the time, that conversation doesn't go well because the pastor has been convinced. I have a conspiracy theory about this, that the big church, big evangelicalism, they have, one of the ways that they've grown is by convincing small churches that the way to become a big church is to do all this contemporary worship stuff. And here's where the conspiracy is. It's very hard to do this kind of contemporary worship well, especially if you're small and especially if you're on a budget. I mean, you got to have like a professional sound guy, a professional lights person. You got to have musicians that are really well trained and practicing. And so you have these praise bands, and they're all professional or semi-professional, and they're practicing all the time, and they've got a lot of resources that help them pull off this thing, including the lights. I mean, it's an amazing thing how much like stage lighting will affect whatever. Just wait till next week's episodes when Pastor Packer's lights arrive.
Be amazing.
and what happens is, if you don't have all of the resources to do it, it's uncomfortable. So here's what happens is you have the small churches trying to act like the big churches to grow, and the pastors of the small churches do two things. Number one, they convince their congregation that the better the worship experience is, the more the Spirit is present, therefore we need to change. And so they've already convinced them that whatever they were doing was not helpful before, but they got to change. And then so they've actually already pointed to the big evangelical church as the place where the Holy Spirit's working. And then they go and they try to implement it, and they do it poorly so that the people leave and go to other churches. I've seen this happen half a dozen times, like watched it happen right in front of my eyes. The pastor started to shift the church from something sort of liturgical. It's never deep conviction, but liturgical-ish, to contemporary. And half the people left to go to the Calvary Chapel down the street where they were doing it better. After all, why shouldn't they? That's the pastor already convinced them that was where the Holy Spirit was working. And so the big evangelical church, that's my conspiracy theory, that they did it on purpose. But it's not a conspiracy theory that this is what's happening. Because the liturgy beautifully adapts to the space. So the liturgy can be broad and ornate if there's a big space, and it can be small and humble. It goes all the way down to the bedside of the dying people. The same liturgy expands to fill cathedrals. It can be appropriate for the situation. But you can't bring a praise band into a deathbed. I mean, put the lighting on in the hospice room and everything. There's a certain kind of size at which the thing works and budget at which the thing works. And so I don't know, there's some trick that goes on there as well.
I heard a great presentation yesterday. I can't remember his last name. Well, I kind of know it, but I don't want to butcher it. But he just wrote the new book for CPH about kind of these portraits of various people from the LCMS history, musicians and cantors and stuff. And he's talking about Walther's advice to congregations about singing lively, which is one thing I think sometimes makes the traditional side look like, if everything's sung like a funeral dirge, then all of a sudden people don't want to sing it. But if you sing it the way it's meant to be sung, it's really beautiful and lively and great. And then maybe one more self-critique. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I do think there is one area where maybe we failed as Lutherans, especially traditional Lutherans, is not having music that our people can listen to outside of worship that isn't like meant to be sung in church. Right. Like I learned about Walther's 4 hymns that he wrote on this trip that didn't seem like they were meant to be sung in church at all. Even the one we have in our hymnal on Easter, it doesn't seem like he intended it to be sung in church necessarily. But and so that some of this music does fill a void in our people's like devotional lives or personal lives. They want something to listen to that's not vulgar, not awful, and some of it's, not all of it's bad. Like I wouldn't sing it in church, right, for various reasons, but it's not bad to listen to, and some of it's quite theologically sound.
Yep.
And yet again, I wouldn't want in church, but we have like Flame, but I can't think of anyone outside of that, and that fits a particular those who like rap, and he has a lot of great stuff, but we don't have as much for some of the other genres maybe as we should that would maybe help combat some of this. Like we don't have that in their daily lives. We're like, no, just go listen to hymns all day, and like nobody does that. Well,
Right.
there's a few people I know that do that, but most people don't do that.
Right. That's right.
So trying to find those kind of things for people can be difficult, and it seems like we would have spent some money on that, train people on that maybe we could have avoided some of this. This has been my thought for a while. I'm interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, I think so. We would always, the Praise Song Cruncher had a second category, which was good for the car on the way to church.
Yeah,
There's just
exactly.
some music that's great. It's just not for church. But
Right.
here's the there's camp songs, and those camp songs are great to sit with a guitar and sing when you're around the fire. But here's the problem, is that when you try to bring the camp songs into church, then you almost force people to bring the church songs to camp. That's what we do every year with the catechism retreat. We sing all these hymns and have matins and vespers by the campfire, which is cool, I guess. But you almost have to, even because it would be better to sing the praise songs there. But when you start to mix up the places, then everything gets all mixy. But you're right. I think a place for good Christian music that's not congregational. It's a performance. It's like a concert. Right. It's great. We should do more of that. Carrie made me this. You remember the old mixtapes? Remember when we used to have tapes?
Yes, I remember those.
and so we had all these. She had all these kind of contemporary Christian music songs, and she made a tape for me, a mixtape. I took it. It's like all I listened is a soundtrack for 3 months in Fiji and for 6 weeks walking around Israel, and I reproduced that playlist in Spotify. It's all these old, like early '90s kind of Christian grunge bands. I love it. It's great. I mean, we need that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's there. But again, it's not. The problem is when you try to import it into worship, then this becomes a big deal. Hey, YouTube theologians, like, subscribe, wolfmueller.co for free books to download, find a church, the free newsletter Wednesday, whatnot. See you soon.